Well, hello everyone, and welcome to FineWineToMe, the wine business podcast. I think this is episode 2 or 3. I haven't decided yet, but maybe it's 4. Who knows? It depends on how well Lee does. And today we wanted to discuss a topic about authenticity on social media, because social media is a big part of digital marketing and it's a big part of wine nowadays as well. But I think one key element which we never really understand so well is how to be authentic. And I asked one guy here who actually, I suppose, knows a lot about how to be authentic on a social media post or generally on a platform. This is 𝗪𝐤𝐧𝐞, excuse me. We just talked about your surname. And he's a wine educator, communicator, podcast host, I would say, and occasional
jack of all trades.
Jack of all trades, yes.
Jack
I think
of all trades,
that's a
master
good
of
one.
none.
Yeah.
I was trying to think of all the things I've done in wine. So I started in retail. So I've done indie retail and I've done retail for more, kind of more national chains. I've done wholesale. I've done selling. Well, I say I've done selling. I had a title, but I was terrible at selling. I've done marketing. I've done writing. I've done import. I suppose the main thing I do is like sort of training, speaking, hosting, that kind of, hence. So I've always defined myself as being a wine merchant because that's how I started.
I was going to say, because you know in your own podcast it's the maker and the merchant, and
the
you are the merchant part.
That's it, exactly.
You still can't sell. That's fine. Okay.
Well, I can. So like selling out and feel like wholesale selling. It's not really my. It's not the space I feel comfortable, I suppose is the way of putting it. But retail sales, where somebody comes to you, I just thrived in that environment. But I've always defined myself. A big part of my personality is kind of defined by what I do, because I do what I do because I love it so much. So the two are innately intertwined. They just, it's kind of one big thing rather than this kind of professionally, personally, privately, all of that. But I've always said I'm a wine merchant, and then probably over the last 3 or 4 years, I realised that I was doing maybe a bit less of the merchant thing and a lot more of the actual active education comms bit. So I've kind of slowly redefined myself, but then the name of the podcast wouldn't really work. The Maker and the I don't know, the Maker and the Educator kind of works, doesn't it? But TM and TM, it just scans better. So at my heart, really, I'm a merchant.
Exactly. So before we head into the actual podcast, let's do my amazing intro. Yeah, that was it. I hope nobody expected any more than that, but that was it.
That's a very man in that image right there.
Yeah, I think I'm wearing the same hat. Anyway, so let's get into the conversation a little bit. Hopefully, in a deeper end as well. Since we know that you are a wine merchant who cannot sell, I think this is your place to actually talk about social media, because that's one thing what you definitely do really well. As only my opinion, but maybe we can ask other people as well. But obviously, you built yourself a nice little following on Instagram, and you started the podcast as well, and you obviously do everything on the side, because it's not that you are a multimillionaire, unless I know bad, but
I'd love this to be a big reveal and go, actually, I'm Bruce Wayne. Sadly, no, I'm not. I'm not a billionaire or millionaire or thousandaire, which is not a thing.
Oh dear. Okay, that's even worse, man.
Yeah. I mean, I've worked in wine my entire career, so yeah, money is something with which I'm really not all that familiar.
Yeah. So basically, what I'm trying to say is you're not driving some fancy sports cars, and you're not living in some sort of a mansion, and yet you still manage to do this all. And I think the secret to this is that you are authentic about this whole thing. And that was my sort of first topic or first question, is why the social media often seems fake when it comes to wine social media. It's not necessarily just wine social media, but generally social media as well?
I think it's a really important. I mean, it's a good question, but it's a really important question to ask in the world of social media in general. So everybody's looking at social media, right? There's very few people don't have some form of social media account, whether it's Twitter or X or whatever we're supposed to call it now. You know, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. There's so many different. LinkedIn is effectively a social media channel, and everybody's looking at it. And you know, as human beings, we like to portray this idea that we're doing really well, that we're successful, that there's nothing to worry about. And you know, I'm not exactly dropping a bombshell to say that pretty much everything you see on social media is some kind of it is massaged in some way to give the impression of success. Yeah. And of course, it being a visual platform, and the traditional gauge of success is sort of material and financial, isn't it? So, you know, there's a couple of, I've seen a few influencers now, not necessarily in the world of wine, but kind of do like they do a post where they go like, here's the Instagram post, but here's what it actually looked like in real life, and go, that's kind of nice to see.
Yeah,
you know, wine's an authentic product, right? And it should be authentically what it is. So even if it's a really big brand, mass marketed with quite high residual sugar,
yeah,
that brand ultimately knows what it is, and it generally wouldn't try and portray itself as being something different. It knows it doesn't need to portray itself through the medium of talking about how much residual sugar it has and it's been made in a huge factory. They come up with some other kind of brand story that is authentic to that brand. And I think people talking about wine should appear in the same way. But in terms of why does this seem, why is there a lot of fakery? Wine's a great lifestyle, right? Those of us that work in wine, one of the big reasons we do it is the lifestyle it brings us. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean huge financial returns, but we get to experience things in wine that in many ways money can't buy, you know, and it's not just, you know, anybody could fly out to Italy and visit a winery, but the treatment you get, the wines you get to try, the food you get served, you know, you get taken into grandma and granddad's house for breakfast or lunch or dinner, you know, things that are much more personal,
yes,
that money couldn't buy. And there's, because wine's such a broad subject and quite mysterious, you realize that a lot of people don't really know very much.
Yeah.
So to kind of give yourself leverage or potentially build an audience, you just need to display that you know a little bit more than the average punter who really doesn't know anything. And you know, I'll be very clear, I don't say that as a pejorative. People not knowing about wine is not a crime. It's not a problem, because there's, you know, 49% of the population of the UK drink it. It's our favourite alcoholic beverage in this country. Yeah. Not knowing about it, that's fine. As long as they're enjoying it and they're happy drinking it, that's great. If they want to know more, then there has to be allowed. So I think if you look at COVID and lockdown, some of us who were in wine just started doing that more because we were kind of doing it and then we had more free time. But I think some people realised, oh, hang on a minute, there's something here that maybe I could do. I like wine, I know a little bit. And suddenly there's been this explosion of influences. Now, you know, pre-COVID, wine influencing wasn't really a thing. Certainly it hadn't entered my sphere. Social media was a thing, and we were aware of social media, and people would put a little bit, but that, like, the whole concept of a wine influencer didn't seem to.
Yes, it's strange. I never thought about that, but that's actually true. It's people were there, but they were there because they were really interested about it, and they were talking about it on Twitter or whatever. But
no one was. I never actually heard anyone pitch themselves as a wine influencer pre sort of 2020, pre-lockdown.
True.
Now, you know, there'll be a listener out there, someone going, well, hang on, I know this person existed way back then. That's fine. I'm not aware of them, which in itself is, you know, again, is not a crime. But suddenly there was this whole world that opened up on social media, and people use social media a lot more during lockdown because, again, we had time on our hands. You know, a lot of people were furloughed. We couldn't go outside. We sat on our phones, right? Yeah. And suddenly this whole world appears. We go, I wouldn't mind a piece of that action. I can get in on that. And I think where we've ended up now with this whole bracket of influencers, which is actually quite an ill-defined term. I'm not entirely sure exactly what it is supposed to mean at the moment, although I have an image mentally of what I suspect how I suspect it's being defined. we've now got this huge wealth of a group that we call influencers, where there's people in it with real knowledge, real passion, real enthusiasm, know what they're talking about, know what their message is, know who they're talking to, all the way to the other end of people who, kind of have just turned up and have sort of maybe made a slight name for themselves.
Yeah.
Take some good pictures or maybe craft some video content, but not necessarily with the knowledge behind it.
Yeah.
And not necessarily actually the passion or enthusiasm in the way that some of us would understand it in terms of wine. The passion is enthusiasm is more for kind of it as being as a comms piece rather than inherently wine. There's a couple of examples where I've seen people sort of start off as wine influencers and maybe not achieve what they were hoping to, and suddenly they don't talk about wine. They still exist, but they talk about a completely different product.
Yes.
So that's been quite interesting to see. What was that? I don't know who coined it. Fake it till you make it. Social media is a really good example of that. And it's not just wine. Wine's the only area really I sort of claim to understand in some small way. I'm sure it happens in other industries, but it's easy to fake it till you make it in wine because, as I said a few moments ago, a lot of people don't really know anything. So
I have a theory about. I have a theory about this. Actually, it's an interesting one because in wine, everybody's faking it a little bit because we will never know everything what we should know. I like to think that most of us know quite a bit, some of us more than others, and I'm not claiming that I know a lot, but I think in wine generally it seems to be a thing, and that combined with social media, I think that just grew.
It's potentially quite a dangerous and slippery slope. So speaking as, I'll give you a real life example. So I'm an educator. I teach WSET courses. I teach non-WSET. I spend a lot of my time actively educating.
You have papers about this proving that you actually finish courses and things like that.
Yeah. So I'm it's easy to call yourself something. I do have this idea that the naming of things and definitions of things I think is really important. So when I call myself an educator, that's something I've worked very hard to achieve, and I've done qualifications, and there's a very nuanced conversation about having a qualification and actually understanding being good at something, and there's a Venn diagram. That's not a perfect circle, but I am a certified educator, and I've worked very hard to achieve that. I've been doing it for a long time, and pride isn't an emotion I tend to experience or feel, but I worked hard for it and I've achieved it. So I suppose there's an element of pride in that.
Yeah.
But I was educating a group on fortified wine, and one of the group brought up a well-known wine publication that unfortunately one of the items that was published was incorrect, and because this was published in a recognised tome, and I was a speaker, like the tome carried more weight in this individual's mind. So, well, hang on, it's printed here, so it must be true. You're the one that's incorrect. Now, in this specific instance, I know that I wasn't incorrect. I know that what I was saying was correct. And
I wanted to listen to this conversation live. That would have been brilliant. Yeah. Okay.
Well, you see, again, I don't like telling people they're wrong. I don't like, because I think there's better ways than that. Just going, no, you're wrong.
Yes.
There's if you're educating someone, don't tell them they're wrong. Get them to think through the process and figure out where the mistake is. Right. I think that's really important. But you could feel that sort of unsettled the room a little bit. And in wine, I don't know if we all find it that easy to go, oh, do you know, I'm not sure. It's something personally I've never really struggled with, because I don't mind acknowledging that I don't know something on wine's such a broad topic. Yeah. But at some point we'll all get caught out somewhere. And these little things, somebody names a producer and it's easy to go, oh yeah, I know them. Gosh, I've never heard of them. And it's those little things we go, no, don't do that, because how many wine producers are there globally? I mean, thousands of them. You
can't know everybody.
You can't know all of them. So there's that. I think this other element of kind of fakery in wine. So again, this is coming at it from the angle of my own personal experience. You look at a lot of the wine content that's out there, and it's all really nice. It's people on trips, it's people drinking great bottles, having nice dinners, going to tasting events in London and 67 Pall Mall, and these things are all brilliant when you get the chance to do it. But actually, when you work in wine full time, those opportunities don't, like, that's not what wine merchants do, right? I spent
because you're actually working, not
exactly. I'm humping boxes around, or I'm on the road up to Scotland because I've got to go and teach a WSET course. Now I'm traveling and I'm going to Scotland. That's great, it's a beautiful country, but very little of my professional life consists of a jolly to London and a brilliant tasting and a nice lunch.
Yeah.
And I think there's some content out there where that's kind of all it looks like. And actually, I think that presents a potentially slightly false narrative to someone watching it who doesn't understand that. And again, there's wider nuances about what each individual is trying to, and we'll touch on that, I think, throughout this pod and with some of the later questions about what these people are trying to say. But that, to me, that's fake when it's like, oh, I'm at this tasting today and this tasting tomorrow. You go, this year, as we record this in December 2023, I think I've done 4, maybe 5 trade tastings the whole year. Yeah. I've done 1 wine dinner. Again, in terms of that I was invited, I've done lots of wine dinners where I was the host or the speaker. I think I've done one wine dinner, and I've done 1 foreign trip. And I'm very, very lucky to have had any of that. And I'm very privileged to have had it, and I'm incredibly grateful for those experiences. But I haven't had the time to go to all of these things. So I think that's an interesting spin. It's not about the authenticity of the speaker or the product, but it's actually what we do day to day is not that. But, do people want to see the day to day driving the road up to Scotland or humping boxes around a wine shop? I don't know. And
actually, maybe that would be a very interesting part of social media when people can, I'm naming myself we, because I'm on that end where I'm creating content, and I also did the boxing things as well when I had to do. But when we talk about sharing behind the scenes images, that is what it's all about. It's a lot of box lifting, a lot of bottle putting on the shelves, and yes, tastings as well. But that's probably a smaller part of things. But here's my question: when you look at these photos, when you look at these videos, when you see all these Instagram contents about fancy wine dinners and here, whatever. Do you get jealous? Do you get angry? Do you get irritated? Does it actually make you feel anything, or?
I think there's perhaps been the odd one where you've looked at it and somebody's been offered a really, really nice, nice is a movable thing for each individual, but it may be a particular producer and go, oh, I would have loved to have gone to that. How did they get a ticket? Oh, I'm jealous. Jealousy is a negative thing, but I think you can try and frame it positively. It's like, I'm really pleased that person's gone, but wow, I would have loved to have been there. I think the question I ask of myself is, okay, that person's got this invitation to this brilliant event, and well done. What was the PR company or the winery or spirits producer hoping to gain from that? Because as we've just sort of mentioned, in this whole group of influencers, whatever that's supposed to mean, you've got people who really know what they're doing, have great reach, real interaction, and then you've got people at the other end who maybe don't have a lot of followers, or have followers that aren't necessarily sincere or don't really do anything with it. The problem with this channel is you can't measure an ROI on it, right? But you kind of go, well, why is that producer taking that person to that specific? And I'll talk about again. I do have anecdotal stuff. I've been to wine dinners when there were people there, and you go, right, the content looks great, but I'm not sure how much it actually achieves for the producer. And given we work in an industry where we don't really have much, we harp on about it a lot in the wine industry. Yeah. Oh, there's no money in it. There really isn't. A lot of these companies, particularly the smaller mid-sized one, they don't have huge A&P budgets, right? So sticking on a wine dinner and opening bottles of wine is quite expensive. So the question I ask more is, what was the winery looking to achieve, and are they going to achieve that by inviting that specific group? So there's maybe the example of, there was an English winery did a retrospective of one of their wines over the last 2 decades, and that looked like a great tasting. I didn't get an invite because it was for proper serious journos. You know, people who are writing for Falstaff, Drinks Biz, really big major global publications. You know, that's fine. So that winery has thought about what they want to achieve by running this event.
Yeah.
Could they have got more immediate coverage by filling it with, you know, people selected from this whole amorphous group that we're calling influencers? That there would have been a lot more photos, a lot more video content, probably a lot more hits. But would that have got them anything?
Yeah.
Probably not, in comparison to actually we get a really good article written up by a well-known, respected journo in this thing. That'll get us somewhere. It's just, you know, what are they looking to achieve with it?
It's interesting actually, because you mentioned a trip you went to. I believe it's the Italian. I think it.
Yes.
You went to Prosecco, was it?
Yeah. So we went to. I was very, very lucky, and privileged to be invited out to Prosecco Conegliano Valdobbiadene DOCG. I forgot the word superiore. We had this thing on the trip where we had to get it right in the exact order, and I've just failed to do that. But in the DOCG area, the much kind of smaller select part of Prosecco in northeast Italy, very, very lucky to be asked to attend that trip, which was wonderful.
And on that, I saw coverage. I assume it was you, or I don't know. There's a few people there, and I looked at that image, and that was a trip which I felt, yes, finally, the people who I knew on that photo, or the people who I knew on that trip, were actually wine people. When I say wine people, is people who work in the trade.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, some of them maybe do social media or influencer type of work as well. But I think that the people there are mostly there because of their general knowledge, interest, passion, and educational achievements.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair summation of who was on the trip. So firstly, you know, everybody on the trip is a wine professional, so they work in wine full time in some capacity. So there were people there who spend their time writing about wine, or publishing books or journals. There were people who were wine presenters and wine communicators, people who run sort of wine events. So it was a really good spread. So that's an interesting thing here about. So I was, I'm going off on a slight tangent, as I'm prone to do. I was invited to an event a couple of years ago down at Langham Winery, to sort of some new releases. Yep. Again, very lucky to be invited. And you're looking down the guest list, and next to my name it said influencer. And I sort of semi-jokingly said to Tommy the winemaker, "What have I done to upset you?" And he asked what I meant. Now, I'll qualify that before anybody gets on their email really angry. That's why you're slating influencers. That's absolutely not my intention at all.
Don't worry, we are 23 minutes in. Nobody's watching at this time. So go on.
Not listening to me. Words and definitions matter. So to be defined as an influencer, as we've already said, an influencer is a really new term. It's only been around about 3 years in the world of wine. So if somebody doesn't know, or nobody knows who I am, that's fine. But somebody who doesn't know who I am, if they hear that I'm an influencer, in inverted commas, they see me through a very narrow prism of like somebody who's been around 3 years, come into it, regardless of background or history, and does this thing involving social media. Whereas I said, no, I'm a wine professional. I've been doing this over 2 decades, and actually the bulk of my experience isn't putting stuff on, Instabook and FaceTalk and all of that. It's actually talking to real people. So everybody on this trip is a wine professional, where they're interacting with consumers through, but some of them the medium of the written word in terms of publications and books. Others actually getting out there face to face. Now within that, there are people who are really active and very good at social media, and are influencers and do use that channel effectively. And I think maybe that's the difference. So when you see someone who's come into influencing in the last couple of years, last 3 years, without the solid wine trade background, and then you see them go to this really fancy, prestigious dinner, I think it's easy to fall into the trap and feel quite negative about that. But that's not a nice thing. It's not a nice way to be. you know, we should celebrate somebody's success, not the other. However, it does make you go, well, back to that point, what's the winery hoping to get out of this? Because
yes,
actually you could have got someone in there with much more knowledge, experience, who's actively dealing with consumers face to face, day in, day out. So I was asked recently sort of about how many people I would speak to over the course of a calendar year. I mean, it's hundreds. I'm in front of hundreds of people face to face, talking to them, pouring wine for them.
Yeah.
And not only am I speaking to them, one of the reasons I love doing those events is I hear straight back from consumers who by and large don't carry the baggage that we as wine professionals do. We've all got loads of that because we've done it for so long, and we know, again, in inverted commas, or we think we know stuff. Consumers don't have any of that. So you pour them a wine, they'll tell you honestly what they think of it and ask real questions. You go, great, I'm getting a direct insight to the mind of the consumer.
Yeah.
In a way, I don't think you can quite achieve through social media. Again, it's not binary. It's not you can or you can't. But there's no experience like being face to face with somebody, especially in the world of wine.
Yes, that's true. And I think that sort of takes us very nicely into my sort of second topic, which is which can be caused by all these sort of fake images and fake videos and fake lifestyle moments, which been happening, you know, literally 30 seconds, and that's usually chopped up by a phone app, which you can download for free. Naming one, CapCut, for example, does really good job for people to chop up, you know, 3 30 seconds videos and create 1 30 seconds video out of it. And that thing is burnout and mental health issues in a place where, and that's why I ask you whether what do you feel when you see all these images and videos about these people, because I think that does happen, and that is actually a real thing which we ought to look out for a little bit. Do you agree? Or?
I do, because there's a real, if we take it back to the wider world of social media for a moment, as I was saying earlier, you know, it's all manicured, it's all massaged, it's all, you know, people doing really great things and succeeding. And we all know that there's a famous image, I can't remember who it is, of an iceberg, and, you know, you see literally the top of the iceberg and it's success, and then underneath that iceberg's massive, and you see all the blood, sweat, tears, hard work, toil, etc. And particularly for young people, so this is social media in general, we do have these unrealistic images and expectations, because life isn't like that. Just generally, most of life is pretty tough and it's hard work. And when you do have that moment of success, be it financial, material, or, you know, landing that job that you've wanted, or going on that fancy holiday, whatever, you've had to work really, really hard to achieve that.
Yeah.
And I think if you transpose that into the world of wine social media, it's very easy to suddenly see people who haven't necessarily been around that long doing all sorts of things that maybe you feel you're entitled to do. Now, you know, nobody's entitled to do anything. The world doesn't owe anybody anything. And I'm a firm believer in, you know, if you get something, you earn it. So I was very, very privileged and pleased to be invited on the Italian trip. I felt I'd earned it by the fact that I've done something for this long. Conversely, if I hadn't been invited, I'd understand that for whatever reason somebody else would get that place. Like, life's too short to get het up and worried about that, and I'd rather see that place go to someone who deserved it, earned it, and was going to do something really positive with it, and I'd celebrate that with them and hopefully learn from them. But, you know, talking to other people I know in the trade who are, again, to use that very, very simplistic division between wine trade professional and influencer, I think during lockdown, you know, we sort of all saw what it was and where it was going. But there's an element now where we go, oh, hang on a minute, you know, a lot of A&P funds seem to be going in this direction. And, you know, again, it's that question of what are they hoping to achieve with it? Who's that person speaking to? What are they doing with it? But the biggest issue is if you sit here and accept it that it's all real, it can cause huge, huge problems. Now, what I would say, when you do see like really fancy, some videos are fairly easy to make, but, you know, influencing itself is difficult. If you decide to become, you are a full-time influencer. To do it, you've got to do that really, really well, and you've got to display some kind of knowledge.
Yes.
Right? Those people who do this really well, the amount of time and effort and work they put into it is enormous.
Yeah.
But again, it's that misunderstanding, right? So you just see this, but this person's gone to a fancy dinner or trip. You don't see actually that individual has put because we're viewing them as an influencer.
Yeah.
There's too much division. So some of them have earned it, but we can only measure ourselves by the standards we hold for ourselves. You're responsible for your own actions, not those of somebody else. So, my reaction there is if you're watching social media and you're starting to get frustrated at seeing somebody do all sorts of stuff, and you feel you should have to just turn social media off, walk away from it. It's a void, isn't it? Social media, in that you just get sucked into it, and sometimes it's positive, and sometimes it's negative. And I've got experiences of really positive things happening on social media, and things that have happened that have maybe sent me into a slightly negative spiral for all sorts of different reasons. I by and large think actually social media is potentially very damaging for one's mental health, because particularly on Instagram, TikTok isn't something I'm familiar. I've never used it. I've been advised many times I should be on TikTok. I don't know if those people were being nice or just trying to get rid of me, so they wouldn't have to see me on Instagram. But Instagram, you scroll down Instagram, and it is a bombardment of people seeming to be successful.
Yes.
And very few of us are successful all the time, or at all. In my case, that grinds you down, even if you don't realize it. Very slowly, when you're exposed to the same kind of piece of media, that starts to play in the mind, and you eventually just go, well, they're all going to this fancy dinners all the time, and I've not gone to one. It's like, yeah, but there's a whole load of stuff they're not actually showing you, right? Whether they're working hard or they're just scamming the system, whatever. There's still a whole load of stuff you're not seeing. I think social media used in the right way is a great tool, but that comes not just from putting stuff out there, but the way that you consume the media that you're in turn are being shown. It can be quite a dangerous place.
I think, I don't know if I get this right or not, but there was a time when you sort of not disappeared from Instagram, but you definitely weren't as active as before.
Yeah.
Obviously, partly, I assume it's because as many other people, you had a lot more time during COVID because you were furloughed or you couldn't do the jobs what you're supposed to do. And then you had more time, and then you went on social media, created a lot of content. It was natural from you. But then there was a time when you sort of disappeared, and that I felt like, okay, that Lee is probably going through some stuff, or maybe he was just thinking, okay, I had enough of this. And why I'm asking this is because I'm going through this regularly. But I mean, the funny part is that I create content mostly for living, and the other stuff, my own things, which I like to do for, whether it's Instagram, whether it's TikTok. I'm on TikTok, by the way, if anyone wants to look up for, please do. You won't see much more than on Instagram anyway. But I go through this sometimes almost on a weekly basis, if not monthly basis. I need to put the thing down and just don't look at it. And then, for example, at this moment, I'm in a stage where I don't want to open up my phone to look at Instagram, even for work. I don't know if you experience similar things, or was it the reason why I didn't see your content so much?
Well, there's I suppose there's quite a lot there. One of the first things was, which you've correctly identified, was so when I was posting content more regularly, it was during the COVID years and lockdown, and I was furloughed.
Yeah.
And you've been very kind to talk about the authenticity of what I do. I mean, partly it's because I'm not clever enough to do something. I'm not smart enough to kind of come up with a really cool streamlined brand of who I am. But during COVID and lockdown, I was at home with a guitar in my hand and a bottle of wine, and I wear silly shirts. So all of that, so they're the kind of things I suppose if anybody has seen my content, they would go, well, he tries to play the guitar, he's wearing a very cool shirt, drinking a bottle of wine. That's what I was doing anyway. Now, when lockdown came to an end and I was taken off further, I was back in full-time work. My work got incredibly busy very quickly, as it did for, I'm not different or special in that case. I mean, it did for most of us. Now, crafting content, and again, I don't want to preempt any future questions, but crafting content should be natural and authentic, but it takes time to craft content as well. So in the case of the material I was doing, firstly, because I'm an educator and communicator, I want to make sure I've got my facts right. So there's often quite a lot of research behind what a post might be 1 minute. There's quite a lot of, I would also write quite a lot of copy. There's a lot of research. I've got to make sure that the stat I'm putting in there is correct as of the date I put it. Because again, I'm disseminating information that people might take as written, or not gospel because it's come from me. Well, I've seen it published and this guy's worked in wine a long time, so it should be accurate. I wouldn't want to put an incorrect piece of information. Sometimes with the guitar piece I was playing, I didn't inherently, it's not necessarily a piece I knew, so I'd have to go away and learn that. And that,
what do you mean? You don't know every single piece?
It's like the Matrix. I just plug in and go, oh, teach me how to play wild cherry funky music.
That's Alexa, that artificial intelligence.
Yes, that's what that is. So there was that. So one of the reasons I stepped away initially was I don't have time now to create, and I'm doing a day job, and I'm it's quite a classic sort of introverted way to be. My natural default setting is I'm an introvert, so I've only got a certain amount of energy during the course of a day. So some people can pull energy out of nowhere and keep going, and I admire those guys. Incredible. I don't know how they do it. I can't. I've got a certain amount of energy, so I do my day job, and then I'm exhausted. So actually, that thought of sitting down and trying to do something, I don't have the energy to do it properly. And if I'm going to do something, I want to be totally engaged and invested in it, and I need a certain amount of energy to do that. And often I go, I don't have the energy to put into this. And then what I also saw was those people who made the decision, I'm going to really push this influencing gig that I've got. Like they just started to fly, and the quality of the content and the quantity of content, you go, I can't match that. I'm just going to get lost in this. And I'm not, it's not competition. Do you know what? I'm going to carry on doing what I do. They do what they do. I get on with, I know some of them, we all get on, great happy days. But then eventually, and I've not really spoken about this before, in my day job, despite the fact that it was ostensibly wine, I've never felt so removed from wine and the wine trade as I was in that day job. Now, as we record this, I'm no longer in that day job. And my day job was primarily teaching and a bit of marketing and writing, but I wasn't in that real sweet spot of really engaged with the product and the consumer because of the nature of the business. Yeah. And yes, I was teaching a lot of WSET. I was spending a lot of time in the car on the road. I was away from home and family a lot. I felt really removed from the life and style of what I considered to be a wine merchant. And then I was looking at social media and seeing all sorts of people living that life, not just people who are specifically influencers, but people, I know and care about, get on really well with. And they were displaying that life. I'm going, somewhere in my head I was going, I really miss that. I'm disconnected from it. And actually, what would be worse for me right now is to continually see it, because it served as a reminder how far away from what I really valued, how far away from that I was. I've never really spoken about that. I think recently I've sort of opened up and said, I've had mental health challenges. All of us have mental health challenges, me included. So I stepped away from social media initially because I didn't have the time, but then I realised it was portraying the life that I kind of wanted to be living, and I knew I could live because it's what I'd always done, but I wasn't living it. And that stark contrast made it really difficult. Now, I've recently come back to making a little bit of content. I'm not back at creating the content at the same level I was during lockdown, but I'm sure, you'll have noticed suddenly there's like a few more videos cropping up, and it's that transition of stepping out of that job immediately. I feel much closer to the beating heart of wine and the wine industry than I have done actually for a good long time. And suddenly that access, that social, that starkness that social media that I was taking from it isn't there, because I suddenly go, I'm kind of getting back to that thing that really it drives me, is kind of my purpose, right? Yeah. So I've waffled a bit there, but that's kind of why I stepped away from it and why I'm slowly stepping back.
Yeah. No, I mean, my take on it, and I often joke about this with my family, with my wife, and friends, is we all have mental health issues here. And it's joke, but it's really not a joke, because I do think it's true, and I do. Maybe it's just the wisdom coming out of me becoming 40 years old, and all that bullshit. But actually, it is a major issue, and I think social media is a big part of it. And I'm not blaming everything on social media, and please don't stop social media, because then I'm not going to have any money left in the bank. So,
which would be even worse for your mental health, right?
Yes, please keep my money flow coming in, and please keep posting fake images on social media. That's great, yes. But sideways is yes. So I do feel that it's a major contributor to mental health issues. Although I'm not a doctor, or I'm not a psychiatrist or anything. But
it's what you were saying. You sort of said, like, there were times when you don't want to pick up your phone, and I've noticed in how our house and my household is my wife, my 10-year-old son, and me. All three of us are on our devices an awful lot, and I've started to think about, hang on a minute, I can only assess the time I spend on my device, right? I'm not responsible for my wife and the time she spends on hers. There's an element where I have responsibility towards my son and how much time he would spend on his device. Of course, he's only 10. But I sort of go, right, hang on a minute. Over the course of a day where I've spent time on my device, how much of that did I need to spend? Because when you're getting back and you're doing content and you are trying to create social stuff, there is a big element of, well, it's through this medium that's on this device, I have to be on it.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I need to do is make sure that once I've done that piece, I've got to put this thing down, because it just saps you, it pulls you in, and we've all done it, every single one of us. You flick the kettle on to make a brew, and you pick your phone up, and an hour passes, and you just dissolved away into it. And I raised this with my wife, and I said, so she doesn't create sort of social content. She uses her device for different reasons, but I raised it then and go, how much time do you think you spend on your device? You don't need to. And it was little things like, be sat at the dinner table with the device. Like, no, let's get the devices at the dinner table and interact as a family, which makes it sound like we're always on our devices all the time. We're not. We are a bit more balanced than that. But it every time you pick it up, I think it's like alcohol, right? And we work in alcohol. How easy is it to just have that extra glass of wine at night when you really don't need it?
Yeah.
And I was asked recently by somebody how, as a wine trade professional, I actually monitor and regulate my own alcohol consumption. And I said, actually, you have to treat it very seriously. And every time I pick up a glass of wine, I have to ask that question: am I drinking this because I want it, or I need it, or it's just there? And actually, the latter two are not reasons for consuming alcohol, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So, I might have had a glass of wine making dinner, and then a glass and a half eating dinner, or whatever. So maybe sitting down to watch the telly, or read a book, or play the guitar, and then go, I've got half a bottle left. I don't need that. I'll save it for tomorrow. And I think we have to take our usage of devices and consumption of social media in the same way, because, again, I'm not a doctor or psychiatrist, but being bombarded with all of those images, and Twitter's actually, I think, quite dangerous in the sense that you can often see a lot of stuff that you don't want to see. So politics is the obvious example for me. I have particular political persuasions, and there are some things that I really don't want to read about or see in Twitter, which I might use as a form of escapism for a few minutes here and there. Yet you see all of this stuff that I maybe vehemently disagree with, and then that maybe gets me annoyed, gets me angry, gets me upset. And you go, that's not worth it. Because whoever it is that's posted that thing I disagree with, if I'm going to change their mind, it's not going to be through the medium of Twitter, because it's not a place for balanced, nuanced conversation. So actually seeing that is more damaging than just putting my phone down and going for a walk for 20 minutes.
Yes, definitely. I think I would love to talk a little bit longer about this subject, but I think we whoever is still watching or listening to this, they're gonna be like drinking bottles from the bottle, actually, because we're talking about
finish the
said such a sad story. But before we carry on, I enlighten everyone with my presence a little bit longer.
Hey, it's Csaba, the podcast host, and in this 30 seconds video clip, I want to ask you a favor. Please visit daddywine.club, which is my side hustle, a sustainable fashion brand for wine lovers. We create all these comfy pullovers, hoodies, t-shirts and jumpers for anyone who loves wine or anyone who loves the designs. Please visit and let me know what you think. And let's get back to the podcast right now.
So here we are. How cool was that? I mean, the technology and all that. Let's talk about something a little bit more closer to home in terms of wine. How can the wine trade or the wine business generally utilize social media better in their communications? Because I think what we often see and what we often experience is people or wine business owners tend to think that social media is a sales channel. And I always try to explain that we are not talking about sales here. We're talking about communication, brand awareness, and maybe a funnel to somewhere down the line, having a sales somewhere down the line. But ultimately it is not that. And it sort of goes back to the first element, the first topic as well, because that is also part of, in my opinion, it's also part of social media often look a little bit fake, because it's just the buy me thing.
Yeah. I mean, you've identified it in a lot of the words you've already used, but social media is a communications channel. It's not a sales channel. Now, I suppose in the eyes of business, kind of eventually all roads lead to sales. That's where you want to get them to. That's what marketing isn't sales, but marketing is kind of essentially trying to open a door to some sales. So the worst thing you can do is see your social media as a sales channel, because people pick up on that very quickly. I mean, you look at, since the Instagram algorithms have changed, and again, there are many more platforms, but you look at how the Instagram algorithms have changed, and kind of like every fourth post is an advert. And people are really fed up of it. They know they're being sold to, and they don't like. So human beings we're very strange creatures. We don't like being sold to about anything. We don't want to be sold, and we want to go and buy something. So the role of a salesperson is quite challenging, because if you go and buy a brand new car and it's absolutely brilliant and magnificent, you bought it. But if you buy that car and it doesn't work and it's dreadful and it's terrible, some geezer sold it to you. You didn't buy it. Yeah. But what you need to do with your social channel, right? So it's a comms channel. Comms is ultimately some form of marketing. And I think in the world of drinks generally, probably the best marketing in my mind is Guinness. And the reason is it's so incredibly consistent. They know what Guinness have done is sit and go, what's our message? Right, and they've nailed that, and then they just keep every advert they do, every piece of marketing, every piece of comms is centered around that message. So I'm not a marketer. Anything I say that sounds like I know about marketing is just based on my experience of things I've done. But it seems to me the basics of marketing is find your message, stick to it, and keep amplifying it. Right. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, you want to get to a sale, right? Because a business doesn't exist without it. But don't use these channels to sell, because these channels are now saturated with people shouting. It's like Speaker's Corner. There's just people shouting through megaphones, all sorts of stuff. Some of it relevant to you, some of it not relevant to you, some of it actively aggravating to you. So when people are using these channels, they're kind of wheedling stuff out that they don't want to see. And what people don't want to see is something where they're being sold. What they do want to see is something that's interesting to them, that's going to capture their imagination. So once you've identified your message, you figure out how can we communicate that in a new and interesting way. Well, for wine specifically, a picture of vineyard is not a new or interesting way. And everybody puts something. We've all stood in vineyards, and however many vineyards we visit, we all keep taking pictures of them and then go, I can't really do it, because a picture doesn't capture the beauty or magnificence. So that you alluded to the trip I was very lucky to be on in North East Italy. That's one of the most staggeringly beautiful places I've ever seen. Not a single photo I've taken captures it. Even the photos that look quite good. I'm not a photographer, but I've managed to get a couple of pretty decent photos. They still don't capture it, right?
Yeah.
So again, my experience of social is primarily through Instagram. There are other channels, and other people would be perhaps better place to speak about them. Instagram's become a video channel.
Yeah.
It's not still imagery. I think long form video is kind of where it's going. So YouTube is a really good platform to use for that. Yeah. TikTok for long form video, Instagram for long form video. But don't copy what everybody else is doing. So if you see somebody and you really like it, don't do that, because then you just look like them. And if you look like somebody else, you're ultimately diluting your own message.
Yeah.
Your own message comes to, what are your brand values? Well, we stand to be the most ethical wine producer, or we want to be the greenest. Don't come up with, there's a particular producer and their kind of whole ethos is we want to be number one. Like, that's nonsense. We want to make the most interesting wines in this particular area, or we want to put this area on the map, or we want to invest in the local area and grow local businesses alongside us, and in doing so, make the best wines that we can make. Like, okay, there's a story. So all of this is, as human beings, we don't want to be sold to, but what we want to consume is storytelling.
Yeah.
Because ever since we were, apes painting on cave walls, right, we've been telling stories. Social media is potentially a really good avenue to tell a story. So if we go to Twitter or X, or I don't know what Mr. Musk wants us to call it. It's Twitter. Like, people still out there who are old enough don't refer to it as a Snickers. They call it a marathon. It's like 40 years ago now. But you look at some of the stuff that works really well on Twitter. Twitter originally was, I think, 140 characters. It's now 280. The stuff that really flies is these threads, right? Where people post something that's 280 and then they post a sequence of tweets or X's underneath it. So what this channel was supposed to be was like a bite-sized snippet that you would consume quickly. What people are starting to is go, hang on a minute, there's a thread here I can unroll, and there's a story, and they will spend longer on that site reading that story, right? As consumers, or in fact as people, we're pushing for time. We have less time than we've ever had because we're being bombarded with stuff and the world is faster paced. So not just have we got less time, everything is happening more quickly, which, that relatively time is being squeezed. People are actively on this channel taking the time to consume a piece of media. So if you can put that in video, and that's through written form. So imagine what you can do with video form. So get the stuff about your brand that's really interesting. Tasting notes, that's not interesting to people. How long it's spent in the barrel, that's interesting to a very small niche of people. And actually, that small niche,
that's not necessarily your consumer.
Yeah, it's not you, right? So I would be interested in how long it's spent in wood and which side of the road the grapes grow on, right? But I'm not going to drive your business to success because I can only buy so many bottles of your wine. Yeah. Find a story that will have a much wider appeal, and then again, funnel it. So somebody that is watching that video and goes, I'm interested in learning a bit more about you and what you do and more technicalities. This comes back to what you were saying about the funnel. Eventually, you want to use this channel to get them to a website, which is your shopfront. So when people are on a website, they realize that they're going to be sold to.
Yeah.
So give them enough information to entice them to go to the website, either because they want to learn a little bit more. So maybe I want to know which side of the road the grapes grow on.
Yeah.
That may well lead me to buying wine because I'm a wine nerd. Or that consumer's gone, oh, wow, this place is really ethical. I'm into that. That's very important to me as a consumer. They then learn a bit more from the website, and you make it as easy as possible for them to make the purchase. But their mindset will transition once they jump from a social media channel to a website. The transition is going from I'm a consumer of information to I'm potentially an active client. Yeah. That's the difference.
I think I talked about this on another episode, I think, or did I? I don't know. I can't remember. But anyway, I talked about this topic a few times before, and I heard it not so long ago. It's a great example of what real good storytelling is they brought up the brand Red Bull as a drinks brand, but as generally a brand, and they talked about this topic: why is Red Bull's storytelling is next level or absolute top is because they don't care about whether you're going to buy a product at that moment or not. What they care about is they projecting a feeling. And emotion is the most difficult thing to achieve through a social platform. And what they try to do is create a feeling with every single piece of content, what they do, of the feeling of freedom, the feeling of that you are capable of doing something. And it's they don't tell you that it's because of Red Bull, although it's it's written down that Red Bull gives you wings and all that, but it's about the feeling of that they're giving you a feeling. And when you look at that content, they actually create that feeling where they tell you that this is because of Red Bull. And I think wine would be capable of that, but it needs a little bit more work than just putting wine bottles.
Wine in some ways is one of the hardest things to market.
Yeah,
because most people that drink it don't interact with it in the way that us professionals think they do, or perhaps should. You know, a bottle is a bottle is a bottle, however nice the label is. A vineyard looks like a vineyard. You know, once you've seen, I was talking to people who've never been to a winery before, and they go, "Oh, it was amazing seeing the barrels." Like, it's incredible. Come to me once you've been to your 10th winery. Like, yes, saw some barrel, right? But you know what? Why do we consume wine? Because it's a social lubricant. It makes us feel good. It helps us relax. We drink it because of the feelings it gives us. Very few people drink. Certainly, I don't think there is such a thing as an average consumer. Robert Joseph's done has done lots of interesting pieces on that. I don't think there is such a thing as an average consumer. The average consumer isn't buying a bottle of wine to go, "Oh, I like drinking this because it tastes of raspberries." Either not. Nobody in the world is doing that. One person's probably me, but trying to capture that. So my favourite wine brand, in terms of the story they've created and the way they utilise it, not necessarily my favourite band to drink, is 𝘂𝑨𝑎𝑑𝑒𝑙 𝘍𝑒𝑑iablo from 𝘂𝑛𝐻𝑢𝑟𝑎, because anybody can tell that story, whether they know about wine or not. Right? It's emotive. It's visual. It has this great aesthetic to it. It's mysterious. And what it does is it puts the consumer at the center of the story. You become the person that's going to the devil's cellar. Dare you face the cellar of the devil and grab a bottle and all. And they've had, big names. Like, I think Pedro Pascal was the most recent celebrity advertising it. As a piece of branding, that's exceptional. I don't think the wine, it's easy to knock big brands. I think if I was going to buy one of the big brands, I'd think about it. But it's not aimed at me stylistically.
Yes, yeah.
But the quality of the branding, the quality of the story, and again, when I'm out there talking to everyday consumers who don't have the baggage that we have, most of them recognise the name, and actually some of them will go, "Oh, I like drinking the wine. It's got the little devil on it, the horns." So whilst they might not remember the name, so Guinness, another great example. You used Red Bull. If you went to the bar and went, "I want that energy drink. It gives me wings." Red Bull. I want that drink. It's black with a white foamy head. Guinness, right? Yeah. There are other energy drinks available. There are other stouts available, but people remember more about kind of brand. Cars is a really good example. I know nothing about cars, but Mr. BMW, when he created BMW, said, "I want my cars to be cars for driving. People who love driving," and that is still their core message today. Volvo, "I want the car that is safe, that is going to protect my family." That was their message then. It's their message now. Whatever they do in their advert, whoever's in it, whatever the scenery, the core message is the same, and we all remember it.
Yeah.
So, exactly. Do we do that in wine? I'm not sure if we do that enough.
No, I don't think we do that enough. But there's a lot of elements to it why we don't do it. But let's not get into that too deep. But let's solve the problem though, because I think that's the other thing. How should wine businesses approach social in 2024? I'm thinking about, do we need to look into new channels or platforms? Do we need to tweak how we communicate on each channel? Or do we have to realize that this is not going to happen from one day to another. This is going to be something what we're going to keep doing for the rest of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I think marketing is because stories are continually evolving. So if you think about when you tell a story down the pub to your friends, or you tell a joke, the next time you tell it, you don't tell it quite the same way, because you realise the first time you told it that the laugh came in a different place to what you said. So you amend the core of the story is the same thing, right? But your story changes slightly, and you learn more about the reason it changes, or the changes it brings, makes you realise more about the audience. So the first thing is there's two parts here. You've got what the story that you want to tell, which comes back to what is your key message, and or maybe what are your key values as a brand, and how do you turn that into a message, and how do you project them? Who are you talking to? Okay, so we're all capable of communicating a certain piece of information, but we communicate it differently to a child than someone in their 20s, someone in their 50s, someone in their 80s. And perhaps I think that's a way of looking at the different social channels. So I think one of the worst things that you can do, again, as someone who's not a professional marketeer, but I suppose more from a consumer point of view, one of the worst things you can do is just to put the same piece of content on all your social channels. Because actually, if someone's going to the effort to follow you on all your social channels, they don't want to see the same thing over and over again. So Twitter, keep it short and snappy for, like, this really cool thing's happened that's part of our story. If you want to learn more, head here, right? Instagram, you can do some cool video content about that. TikTok, again, that's long form video. YouTube, like, people will go to YouTube and watch stuff of a certain length if they're interested enough. So use those channels to kind of drive them in. I think YouTube is, I was going to say coming back. I don't know if it went away, but TikTok seems to be the social channel that's had the largest impact upon the others. So the way Instagram's changed, it's changed in response to the success and format of TikTok. And even on YouTube, if you go on there now, there's loads of videos that look like short reels that you would see on TikTok. So YouTube's actually a place where you've got to get it right. So what you don't want to do is put a really clumsy piece of 15-minute video content on there. But you can put a piece of 15-minute content on there as long as it's tight and sensible and communicates lots of your ideals and values. Ultimately, the idea that you're going to eventually channel them to the website where the consumer expects to be sold to. But don't put the same piece of content out on each channel. But finally, again, this is our message. How would we tweet that? How would we Instagram it? Actually, LinkedIn, let's get a piece written, because people read stuff. We seem to forget that because we're in such a visual media nowadays. People read stuff. They will read. Again, what's difficult there is not everybody's going to read everything. But if your piece of content is right and snappy and jazzy enough, and it gets to the core, the beating heart of who you are and what you want to communicate, you will find the right audience and they'll read it. Don't be put off by, one of the worst things we do on social media is chase likes. This goes back to the question I asked about, sometimes you see certain influencers with big following getting certain things. I'm trying to think how to frame this. So if you decide as a brand that you want to work with influencers, that's a great thing, because a lot of them do a lot of good stuff, right? Find influencers that are going to align with you, your brand, and find influencers that are clearly there to promote you, not themselves. We're all always building our own brand, all of us, whether we want to admit that or not. But there are some people where you can see their brand actually takes precedence over yours. It's got to be a level playing field. But then it doesn't take a lot to realise when somebody's falsely inflated their follower numbers. That's really obvious. Don't waste your money on it. If you want to work with an influencer, pick someone who's got genuine following, that's good at what they do, that you like, but that aligns with you and your brand. I would always advise checking out. So as an example, again, I can only talk about me. I was recently approached and asked to if I'd like a wine, a very specific wine from a specific place and a specific variety. And I was very grateful to be offered it. And I made that clear. But it's not a brand or variety that I would talk about. It's just because it's not me. So it wouldn't be authentic to me. I respect what the brand is and what that wine does. And it does that very well. But it's just not me. Actually, it wouldn't benefit that brand. And wouldn't benefit me if I was looking at that. That's a secondary concern for me. but that, like, nobody would be winning in this. I'd be sent a bottle of wine that I don't really want to drink, and that would be obvious, right? It wouldn't be authentic. So go for authenticity, but figure out your message, how to communicate it, and communicate it well on your chosen channels. If you don't understand a channel, don't use it until you do, and don't put content out for the sake of it. We've all done that. Go, I haven't posted for 24 hours. I better put something up.
Yeah,
you can see when content's been manufactured because it has to go up, rather than you've put it up because it's what you want to say, and that's an authenticity issue. So it could be that authentically you believe in posting as regularly as possible. If you haven't got the content, don't just throw something together, because again, we're all being bombarded with lots of content all the time. Don't put something up for the sake of it. Put something up that will add real value to you and to that of your audience.
Yes, exactly. I mean, there's a couple of things I wanted to, get back to. Is one of them is the influencers. What you talked about them a little bit. I completely agree with you, and it's just a good realization that what we actually do with many of them is we pay them to promote themselves, because what you said, that they actually very often promote themselves more, or just slightly bit more than the product itself, or the service you ask them to do, is absolutely true. And I think it's a very valid point, that I think we sending them bottles of wines and very often pay them to actually they build up their own brand, whereas they're doing very, very little to the brand itself. So, but that's just a side line. And the other one is, I think, YouTube, what you mentioned, and not just YouTube, but generally long form content, because I think there's another very interesting idea, which I believe, and I think it's true, that obviously what you do on Instagram, or what you do on Twitter, or what you do on wherever, TikTok, is one thing, because people scrolling endlessly. And when you reach people, and when you get views on that sort of platform, that view worth a lot less, in my view, than the person who actually happy to sit down and watch 20 minutes, 40 minutes, 2 hours, 3 hours worth of content on YouTube. And there's another question here, because I think it's very relevant to you, is that podcasting, because a lot of people don't think about podcasting as a long form social media platform, but audio itself, and long form audio especially, is incredibly powerful, or can be very powerful. And one thing I just realized very recently is, because we consume a lot of things, whether it's an image or a video or whatever, you get distracted quite often with ads, with this and with that, and what's on the sidebars and wherever. When you're listening to a podcast, you don't necessarily get distracted as easy. I think so. Your engagement is much deeper certainly much deeper than a social media post on an Instagram or a Facebook platform. But yeah.
So there's I believe they're called sort of active listening and passive listening. So passive listening is, you stick on a podcast that's maybe like a really informal thing, and you're cooking dinner, and so you're listening, but you're not concentrating. So you're absorbing it, you're taking it, you're laughing at the right points, and so on and so forth. Active listening is where you sit down, you're not really doing anything else, you're just totally engaged on listening to this content. People listen to podcasts on all. I didn't realize how big podcasts were really until I sort of got involved in it with Fergus, who's my co-host on The Maker and the Merchant. You didn't realize how much people listen to this. And again, because we're bombarded visually, I think a lot of people like the escape, that they don't have to be looking at something. You can, so I think sort of Ferg's partner often will listen to it when she's driving, or sometimes like just going to bed. So there's passive listening, but it's still taking information in. I listen to podcasts when I walk every day, and that's great. So I'm as much as I'm clearing my head, but I'm listening to the podcast that I like to listen to. And I can absorb an awful lot of information there about the subject I want to listen to. So again, we're at a point on all forms of social media where there is oversaturation. So that means if you're going to use it, you've got to really nail what it is you're going to do. And if you do that, you will stand out from the crowd. Starting a podcast, anybody can be on social media. Anybody can start a podcast. I mean, I've done it with Ferg, and neither of us are particularly technical, right? They're not difficult things to do, but they're potentially really rich environments for sharing information, brand knowledge. And actually, if you're a winery really actively courting an audience, there's always something to talk about. Some of it might be on the more technical side in terms of putting out regular content, but again, you would want to cultivate some of that audience. But actually, some of the wine podcasts out there that are really good have such an array of guests from different fields. And also, consumers can dip in and out, whereas Instagram, you're kind of scrolling through looking for something. This is an audio thing. I'm doing that thing with my finger to indicate scrolling through a phone. With a podcast, they're all there, and you can go, well, I don't want to listen to that one because I don't like that guest, or I'm not interested. Well, I'll go straight into this episode.
Yeah.
The podcasting is a brilliant format, and we are ready to start consuming long form again, whether it's video, written or audio. Podcasts will be very powerful.
Is it mainly because of escapism? Is it mainly because of we want to switch off?
I think there's an element of. I think social media at its heart kind of maybe started as a bit of escapism, perhaps, or maybe some of us use it as an escape, so we forget about what we're up to. The podcast. So I can only speak from the experience of my own consumption of it. But I listen to escape. So as I've alluded to, I used to spend a lot of time in the car, doing very long journeys. It's a great opportunity to listen to a podcast, partly because I obviously don't forget about driving. I drive safely, but it took me out of that drudgery of sitting behind the wheel of the car for 5 or 6 hours. Yeah. When I go for a walk, part of the reason I walk is not just exercise, is to escape from being sat in front of a lot of my work as an educator and communicator is on the laptop. These days, whereas I like to be out, I like to be engaging with people and such. So actually, going for a walk is a piece of escapism that naturally accompanies. So I can get that podcast on and escape to the world of whatever it is I'm listening about for an hour.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly think that it's one of the main trends, which is going to be becoming huge. And I hope your podcast will become bigger and bigger, mainly because the great hoodies which we created for you guys, but
which I'm modeling as we record.
Yeah, wear them proudly. But I do think it has huge potentials, and part of the reason why I started it, obviously this is going on YouTube, and I'm planning to do some audio as well. I have no huge expectations. In fact, I don't have too much expectation at all. But the reason I started to do it from the other end, from the host end, is because what I felt is in a short period of time, what you get with Instagram or what you get from TikTok or wherever you are, you don't get the quality out. I think you have. I know this is a long one, and nobody's going to listen to it for an hour and 14, 15 minutes. I think for a deeper conversation, I think you need more time, because otherwise it's just going to be too short. And then maybe use Instagram or the other social channels to feed them into this. And if whoever is more engaged, then you can actually get them to your website later on.
So this comes down to how to best use social media. First is have a plan, have essentially an activation plan.
Yeah.
So and you work backwards. So what's the overall goal for 2024? We want 50% more consumers, or 100% more viewers or whatever it is, and then you work backwards as to how you achieve that. And I think one of the things that a lot of people have done badly, marketing's hard, good marketing's hard, is don't scattergun. Oh, I've got to put a piece of content, I'll put it there. Now, you can't just create content for the sake of it, but it's easy to create content when you have a plan. You go, right, January, the kind of thing we're going to talk about with our brand are these. We want to cover these 3 or 4 points, right? February done, March done. So you have a broad plan. But a big part of that plan is going, well, how can we get people to bounce from one channel to the next and find the people, as you've just said. So if we've got a 30-second video on Instagram and we make it clear how they can get from Instagram to the next channel to the next channel to, if you really want to know about this and listen to two guys waffling on for an hour and a quarter, here's the link, there you go. And it's great because it's a link and that consumer can choose not to, or they can choose to go. But within each channel, make sure there's a link to wherever that sales platform is, because ultimately, as we've said, the goal is to sell something so that the business continues and we've all got money. But have a very clear plan of what you want to say, when you want to say it, and where you're going to say it, and how it all fits together. All these channels fit.
Yes. And with that said, what is your plan for 2024 then? Do you have, with the podcast to start with, and you personally as well?
Totally scattergun. No, not at all. So the podcast, as we record this last night, I caught up with Ferg in person. We had the Maker and the Merchant Christmas Beano, so we went for dinner, and the main plan for TM is for it to continue because we both love doing it, and we seem to have people who like listening to it. I mean, I don't know what's wrong with them, but they really enjoy listening to it, and we're very grateful that they do. But the plan is to continue as we have, but we've never really been on top of our diaries, and it's always been a little bit, we need to get another episode out. We've only got a couple of days. So the plan is to, like in quarterly blocks, just have dates planned in with the list of guests that we would like to speak to, that we think would like to speak to us, and kind of just have that more planned, and eventually actually try to move to kind of recording a couple of episodes a session, because one of the really important things with content is you do need it to be regular, especially with the podcast, and just putting an episode out and then nothing for 6 weeks, because we are creatures of habit and we look for patterns, and we know, that podcast I like every second Thursday. I need to head over to Spotify or iTunes or whatever. So TM will continue. We're hoping to make some plans to get out in the field. We've only done one live episode before, which was enjoyed by everybody involved. We're hoping to actually get out to some wineries and sites and again actually maybe develop a little bit of YouTube content alongside it. The plans for me currently, I'm not entirely sure, but I'm going to be doing more writing. For sure. Writing isn't something I enjoy the process of, perhaps, but I enjoy it when I get to the end and I've written something and it works and somebody takes it off and does something with it. So I'll be doing more writing. I will be returning to creating a little bit more social content. I'm using this little break over Christmas, New Year, again, as we record this. It's kind of actually sit and make plans. So, basically everything we've talked about for the last hour and a quarter is you've got to have a plan. You've got to know what you want to say, how you want to say it. And because I haven't really been active on social media, really the best part of 12 months, I've kind of lost a little bit of sight of what it was I was doing and where it was going. So it's a chance to reassess that and hopefully come back with some stronger, better, more interesting content. There I suppose the two. And actually, something we lose sight of is try and have more fun doing it. I got into this industry because I love it and it's really enjoyable. Yeah. And the last 12 to 18 months haven't really been as fun as I know they can be. So I want to keep that at the heart of what I do, whether it's TM, paid employment, freelance tastings and writing. I want to make sure I'm really enjoying it while I'm doing it. So that allows me to do something like I just said, would you like to talk about this wine? No, it's not for me, that one. I'm really grateful that you think to ask me. But actually, I'd rather talk about these kind of things than that, because it's easy to say yes. And sometimes it doesn't benefit everybody, and it's not just about making sure it benefits you, but it should be a two-way conversation. So
well, I suppose that was a very, very nice ending to this podcast episode, actually, because you just nailed it with the bringing in the fun element to it, because I think that's very important to remember that all this started off as fun. I suppose. And I think as long as we can keep that element here and be reasonable enough to understand the mental health issues coming with it, I think we can use social media in a bit more, I don't know, a bit better, a bit more cleverly
I
in
think
2024.
Think about when you're posting your content, but think about how you're consuming the content of others, and don't get sucked into the. So it's like that thing, isn't it? Sometimes you get home from work and stick the TV on. How easy is it to just slink in the sofa and lose 5 hours? And sometimes we do that because we need it. But social media is different to TV, and it can be a bit more draining. So I think if we all just think about, because social media, some of the stuff we said maybe sounded a bit negative. Social media at its heart, when it's good, can be phenomenal. You know, I've met great friends. I've had incredible interactions, conversations, just connecting with people that I wouldn't be able to connect with in any other way. So at its heart, yes, it's a comms channel, but it's comms bringing people together. And that's brilliant. That's to be celebrated. So what we've got to do is fight all of the negative stuff on it. At its heart, social media is a wonderful thing, but we have to be, the price of freedom is vigilance. So we have to be vigilant about how and when we use it. But yeah, it's great. It's great at its heart, really.
Yes. Well, I'm very grateful for your time, Lee. As always, it's always been a pleasure to talk to you. I'm happy to conclude that so far this is the longest episode, and it's, you know, we don't have to cut it for reasons of me swearing or you being boring or whatever. So
makes a change for me, definitely. No, thank you for for inviting me on. I'm always thrilled and slightly surprised when anybody asks me to do anything. But because I'm very lucky and privileged to be able to talk about a subject that I love, and I always acknowledge that don't know everything at all, but it should always be a conversation. But any time that you and I spend together and chat and talk, it's just life affirming and wonderful, and you sort of you brighten up things when sometimes they seem a bit dark. It's been
I have to cut
really
this out.
lovely.
Come on.
No, thank you. Thanks for asking me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
No, thank you very much. And if anyone ever watched the end of this video, please subscribe, press the little bell button, and do the likes and the usual stuff. So, and then hopefully this podcast will carry on, and probably not as successful as TM and TM, but let's hope so. Anyway, guys,
awesome.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Lee, and speak to you soon.
Speak to you soon. Cheers.